I have actual cheeks. It's a little fumy in here. Whew. I really shouldn't be using things like nail polish in a closed room like this, but c'est la vie. I mean, I kind of like this. It's stupid that I did it, and I don't think I would ever do this particular approach again. But it is kind of funny. So this is one of the ones that I made. This is an egg painted with nail polish. So I got two different colors of like a blue-green and a black. That's my initials on the back. On the front is E for egg. There are a couple things I learned in doing this. First of all, it takes a lot of nail polish to cover an egg. 2, don't put the acetone nail polish remover on your bed. It will eat through the foam mattress topper when it spills. Yep, that's just one of those things we learn doing stupid things. But you can actually use a nail polish remover to remove messed up sections by wiping them. So this is one of the things I experimented with doing for egg for E. This is the other one. Now I used, and it's hard to see on this one because the colors are faint on the camera. They're not as bad on the actual egg. But this is like dollar store watercolor paints painted onto the surface. Now, one of the things I'm trying to learn as we go is how much of it still rubs off after the fact that it's been dry for a little while. And it's a fair amount. You can still get a little bit of the staining, but a lot of this rubs right off, and you can feel it. It's like powdery on the surface. So I don't think watercolor works particularly well. But I mean, it was something I wanted to try. I think you'd be better off with model paints, like the enamel model paints, which aren't that different from a nail polish. But overall, the best bet I think for painting eggs is acrylic paint. I just think that's probably the best way to go if you want to paint the eggs. But this, and I've been posting some of these to my personal Facebook page, but I may start posting to other accounts with some of this stuff. This, I have mixed feelings about this. This is the pyrography. This is wood burning on a wooden fork. The reason I have mixed feelings about it is it looks like I just drew on it with a Sharpie fine tip marker. So I don't know that it offers anything substantially better than just using a marker to do it, other than if I gave this a polish of like a boiled linseed oil to seal it, or a food safe lacquer, I wouldn't have to worry about the chemicals in the Sharpie marker bleeding through or anything like that. This is burnt into the surface. I could stain the wood and it wouldn't smear the ink because there's no ink on it. This is all burnt right into the wood. And it was all right. I do have, like, as happens with a lot of these projects, there's a painful sacrifice that needs to be made to the crafting gods. And one of those sacrifices made in the last few days was to the soldering iron I used as a wood burning tool. I got a little burn on my finger there. It's not that bad. I'm just sort of laughing about the whole joke of it. One of them is taking a little longer than I had hoped. It's the ring project, and that is in the process of waiting for the final stage to be ready. These are wood veneers. And this is another one. And you have to boil them in water to soften them to form a tight coil like that. And then you got to let them dry in those tight coils so that when you unclip them, they'll unspring a little bit, and then you can cut the pieces you need, glue the ends together, sand them so that it forms a smooth transition between them, and I mean, you've essentially made a wooden ring at that point. Now, there is sort of like a caveat to that in this, and that the wood veneers I got from a thrift store a long time ago, and it turns out the backing, I don't know if you can see it on there, it's got like a cardboard backing. So I am a little worried that setting the transition between the end point and the rest of the body, if I do sand it on one side, I have to see if I can mainly sand on the paper side to remove the paper so that the wood pieces can meld better together without leaving an obvious visible seam. So that's half done on that one, I would say. I do have one that I'm actually pretty proud of. This is the leather project that I was working on. So it's and I do need some leather glue to attach the top, but I'm going to actually use it for something else first. But it's the container for game pieces that I'm going to be using for some of my game stuff. I totally dig that. And I think the other one that's, in a position where I could show tonight, and we'll switch over to talking about some of the other things going on, but I don't know if the camera's going to let you see it. And I stupidly chose to use like a gold foil wrapping paper. I used squares. That's actually one of the squares that I was going to use. I cut a square and then cut it into quarters, and that's one of the quarters of the square I used to do this. This is a piece of origami folded from a square this size into an origami crane that fits inside this bottle. And actually, one of the other pictures I took of it the other day was to post on my social media, and that picture was I put it on the head of a dime, and it was about half the size of the head of the dime, maybe a little less than half. And so, like, there's a part of me I'm a little disappointed that I couldn't get it to a third, because I know I fit 3. I think it was a penny I did it on, but I know at one point I fit 3 origami cranes on the face of a penny. And so, but I got to give myself a little leeway there, because I haven't done this in 12 years minimum, probably longer than that. And so, yeah, it's not up to what I was doing 12 years ago, the last time I did that. So there's some drift on it. That's to be expected. But I did sort of like feel good that I got that. Like, it feels good to get back into doing things I know I used to be able to do, and know I'm not that far out of the range. Now, I will say, on the E on this egg, putting the E on the front of it, that is not how I intended the top to come out. But the fine tip brush is not as easy to do as you would think. They give a fine tipped nail polish brush in the one that I was using. It's actually this one. It's meant for doing fine detail, but it's like a pinstriper's brush and not like a fine tipped like model maker's brush. And so when I say it's like a pinstriper's brush, if you've ever seen a pinstriper doing their pinstriping, the brush tip is like this long, and it coats itself in a pretty thick nail polish. And so you have this thick nail polish on this thin, super flexible tip. And so you're going to get this bead that starts to form down towards the tip of the brush. Or you tip back and try to hold the brush up like this, and it starts to run down your arm, and then you spend the next 15 minutes using acetone to wash your skin off. But yeah, that brush is not ideal for doing fine detail work. So I would feel like, honestly, I would have to make custom brushes to do the kinds of things that I want to do with this. But I don't think I will ever use nail polish again for this kind of craft, because I don't think it makes sense for what I'm doing. I think I could probably get better, more achievable styles with just like a simple craft paint, like a craft acrylic. So I think that's where I'll probably go when I do it in the future. I went for a fairly simple, like spotted texture with a two-tone spotted color. I could do other patterns on something like this, and I could have some fun doing that. But yeah, I'm hopeful that the rings turn out as well as I've done in the past. I've never used this veneer before, and so the other thing that frustrated me about this particular veneer was trying to cut a strip off. I was trying to cut a rectangular strip, but the grain just split, and it split into a triangle, like a long tapering triangle. And I was like, that's not what I was aiming for. I can't undo it now, but the sort of brittle nature of it is a little disappointing. It's way thicker than I want it to be, because the thing I'm used to doing is taking a hand plane and getting thin shavings off of that hand plane. You can soak them in a water a little bit if you need to make them extra soft, and you wrap them and let them dry in that wrapped position. And plane shavings are almost like paper. They're substantially easier to do than you would think. These are going to be hard to work with because they're thicker than a plane shaving is, and they're more crunchy because of their thickness and the grain of the wood. And that paper backing is a problem. It shouldn't be too big a problem for what I'm doing, but part of the reason I wanted to use these is these are red oak, and red oak has a feature that's kind of fun. If you take a piece of steel wool, for my case, I actually have gallons of this material, but we had a guy who was removing rust from the underside of a truck in the makerspace. So he took a whole truck frame and soaked it in he got a giant tub off of Craigslist or something. Like, everybody's joking around like, did you ask the guy what he was doing with the tub before? And I was like, this looks like the kind of tub you dissolve bodies in, so you don't ask questions. But it was a big wheeled tub that he filled with, I think, 4 or 5 gallons of vinegar. No, he had to do like 10 gallons of vinegar, I think, at the time. And then he topped it up a little bit more with some water just to get the level above the top of the frame sitting in the bottom of the tub. And that vinegar, you leave that piece in there for, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks. It couldn't have been that much. It must have been a week and a half, almost 2 weeks. He went on a business trip and he came back, and he pulled the frame out, and most of the rust was removed from it. But you'd have to be quick at that point to rinse it off and give it a coat of something to prevent rust from forming again, because it's been in an acid, and that acid is going to oxidize the surface again quickly. But it's going to be a thin patina of a rust rather than the scaly rust that he had on there before. But at the end of this process, he had roughly about 15 gallons of rusty vinegar sitting in the bottom of a tub. And so I pulled a lot of that stuff off, and I put it into empty milk jugs. Partly because, as an experiment, I took a piece of scrap wood from our wood pile, and it was a piece of red oak, I think, or a similar family of wood. And I dipped my finger in this rusty vinegar, which it should be fine. It's just acetic acid and iron oxide, none of which is particularly toxic. So I dipped my finger in it, I pressed my finger onto the piece of wood, and you could see where I pressed my finger on it. It turned like somebody had just taken their finger, like this slightly apple cider vinegar color vinegar on my finger, pressed against this the same color of wood as that, turned instantly ink black. It started with that kind of like, well, obviously it looks wet because I've just put a liquid on it, but it's like, is it soaking in? It gets that slightly darker tinge of soaking in. And I looked up, I said, huh, this is interesting. I didn't fully expect it to do this. I know it's something you can use as a mordant on fabrics. And then I looked down and it's just like, pop, it was full on ink black. And I went, oh, this could be a lot of fun to play with. So I had those like 12, 15 gallons of this stuff. I gave away a couple gallons. I cooked down a bunch of gallons to half their volume, so I didn't have as many of the bottles around, but I still have like 4 or 5 bottles of this stuff sitting around years later. And it should blacken this to an ebony finish on the wood pretty quickly and pretty well. I don't know for certain that it'll still go full ebony. I did have a batch that I left out in winter and it froze. And that batch that froze, for whatever reason, the liquid became crystal clear. But when you put that crystal clear liquid onto a piece of wood like that, it made a deep, rich, dark brown, but not black anymore. So I'm very curious to see what multiple years has done to the material. And so I'm curious to see if I'll get a dark, like almost not quite hickory, like what's another wood with that dark brownish tone? I guess like cherry is a little more red to its tone, but it has that super dark hardwood look, and I might get that. I might get that ebony finish again, which I'm game for. And the other interesting thing about the I call it ferric acetate. It's other people call it iron acetate or stuff like that. But the other thing that's interesting about it is its penetration into a hardwood like oak isn't super deep. Now I did take a piece and soak it in a tub full of it, one end in, and came back an hour later and saw that through capillary actions up through certain parts of the grain, you could see speckling of black around the top where it hadn't been dipped in. I thought that was particularly interesting, but at no point, like you could cut on the bandsaw slices of this off and it's going to look like just micro dots of black in the middle of your wood. And if you just do a surface wipe, it doesn't get into the wood at all. And so we actually took a couple pieces of round stock, coated the whole thing in ferric acetate with basically a paper towel. You wipe it on, and by the time you fully rotate and get all parts of it, the first parts turned completely black. And so we took that piece that was black, let it dry for about a week, and then the next week the wood turners came for a visit, and they hooked it up onto chucked it on one of the lathes and spun it and took a gouge to it, and they barely had to touch the surface before they were underneath the black back to the natural wood color. And so it gives the possibility of being able to cut a channel into the wood and cut the pattern you want to pop in contrast. So you could take a piece of wood and make a piece out of it, like a vase on the lathe or something like that, and then use ferric acetate to give it a skin coat of that ebonized finish. And then you could break out some nice fine X-Acto knives and cut little patterns into the surface of it, pick them out, and have that contrast of those pieces popping back out again. And so I kind of want to see what I can do with playing with some of that with the wood rings. I've got a few other things I can do during the course of this week. I don't know if I'm going to have enough of like everything done to show anything of any real interest. It's been a super busy week for working. And I feel like that's probably going to be, I'm going to get most of my work done late at night. And I'm probably going to do, a few of them are going to be start something and leave it for the next day. So I don't know what I'll have ready for next time to show off, but I'm having some kind of fun with it anyway. I've been thinking about the pod isolation pod experiment and wondering if there's a way to make that happen. And I think there are probably a couple ways I could probably do something like that. That don't involve necessarily purchasing the pod and getting it here, because that could run upwards of a couple thousand to get that to happen. But I'm reasonably certain I could figure out how to build one relatively easily that would do the same thing for way less money. I mean, you're essentially building enclosed bunk beds. So I think it probably wouldn't be super hard to do that. Then it just becomes a question of how do I make something like that happen? And that's, yeah, again, that's mainly just for my own amusement at the idea of doing a project like that. But I can't guarantee I'll ever actually do it. And it's one of those things. It's unfortunate because there's a part of me that says, like, I'd be willing to give it a try. And I've mentioned it to a few other people, and a few other people have sort of said, like, "Are you stupid?" And that makes me instantly question, like, oh, maybe this isn't, a fun project anybody else is going to find interesting. Maybe that's just my weird, quirky mind playing with the idea. So there is the impulse to give up on the idea, and at the same time, there is that contrarian part of me that says, "You." Now I'm definitely wanting to do it. So those two parts of me are kind of warring with each other. But I have talked with some people online about an art community kind of stuff, like doing an art gallery channel on Instagram or something like that, for maybe forwarding some of the art stuff. Because I gotta say, I probably won't do a lot more of the micro origami stuff. I will do some of it just to be in the practice of doing it, because there's a part of me that enjoys it. But I am kind of curious about experimenting with a few other micro crafts and see what I could do. And I'd be willing to bet you that if I pursued maybe doing acrylic painted eggs as ornaments for holidays or things like that, like I would be willing to bet you I could at least get one of my multiple art ideas from the last year and a half or more to a degree that I could make a sort of a part-time job income from it if I work on developing it. And that's one of those things for the Opportunity Forge channel when I get there is, developing a business, making a path for myself to be more business minded, with the idea that it's going to make it so that I'm more independently capable of being creative. Because that was one of the gripes. I don't know if I bogged it down last time I was doing a video on here with some of my ramble. But for me, it shouldn't be as hard as I've made it for myself to get some success in an artistic field and take that success far enough that it frees me up to do other creative projects. Because in the end, like, as I said before, I don't need as much to make it as so many people oftentimes frame things. You see a lot of people talking about how, like, you need 38 to 40,000, sometimes $50,000 a year to qualify as being able to make it on your creative ventures. Like, hitting 24,000 a year would be almost double what I make now. And that would do pretty well for me to be able to sustainably live off of that. Now, if we up that to a little bit more so that I can put enough away towards a time where I may be able to create as much, yeah, I mean, that's reasonable, but I don't need anywhere near what most people will quote you as you need to be able to survive off. And I feel like that's more achievable than I ever really gave it credit for. And I kind of want to take the opportunity to sort of see, like, challenge myself, like with some of these other challenges, challenge myself to see if I can get that off the ground and actually do something successful in that sort of way. And if I can be marginally successful to the degree that it frees up more of my time to do more creative things, that's what I need to be doing. And so that's sort of part of what I want to do. And if in the process of doing this for myself, I learn enough that I can help some of my friends who are artists achieve some little side hustle or whatever they want to call it, like, yeah, I want to do that. That's what I want to be doing. That's sort of, I think I've always sort of mentioned that I want to pursue my own creative adventures, but I also want to be able to give the chance and help other people do the same. And that's at least 50% of everything I want to do. And so I am sort of hopeful, and risky as it is to be hopeful in today's world, that I can potentially get some of that up and running in this next year, and see if I can also help some of my friends do the same. I guess that's most of what I have to talk about tonight, and we're almost at a half hour anyway, so I can probably call it here. But I've got a few other things I'm working on, and then I will probably have another thing or two to post and share in the next. What's today? Today's Tuesday, so on Thursday I might have another project to show off. I'll probably have one or two, and then Sunday I should probably have at least a couple more. And I mean, I think the other thing about doing these projects is it sometimes feels like the inertia from shifting from a day job to doing something creative is so hard to overcome that it's almost easier not to even try. And so when I do get one of these, like, okay, I got started on this thing, like, I admit, like, the leather project, the night I did the leather project a little while ago, I started it and I'm like, oh, all right, let's see how we can do. And I got like a sixth of the way in, an eighth of the way into the project, and I was just so in the zone on it. I didn't even notice I didn't get to bed till 5 a.m. that morning. But it was just sort of like, that's fine. I'm full on in my creative zone at that point. Well, it's not fine. I have to be up by a certain time in order to go into work, and if I only get 3 to 4 hours of sleep because I'm doing that, that's a quick way to make myself sick and compromise my ability to do either crafting or my job for days afterwards. So I can't really do that very often. But like once I've gotten started on things, I really kind of get into it. I might dabble again with some of the pyrography stuff, the wood burning, because I kind of like the idea of being able to do some other things with it. This was really just seeing if I could get back into it, because I did a little wood burning when I was like 8 or 9, I think, with a wood burning kit my father got me. But it was like crayon drawings on wood with a burning tool. I would wager I could do some very interesting things if I just got a little practice and experimented these days. But that's, I mean, I did it because I wanted to try it, and I wanted to explore it again too. But just noticing some patterns in there that's not intended, but okay. The experimenting with it was soldering iron was interesting. The tip on it was like a it was like a nail head, so it was very, in a lot of ways it's a lot like a pen tip. So I mean it's sort of like that at the tip of it, and that tip could give me some very fine dots, which were kind of good for some of what I was doing. The biggest hurdle I came across with that is the grain in the wood would sometimes catch the point. And when I was trying to do some of these rounded shapes, you had to be like feather touch so that you're just dragging it across the surface and not getting anywhere near enough to sink into the grain. But, and you can, I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but you can see a couple of those points where it's a little jaggedy because the point caught. It almost looks like a series of dots. And a few times I did have to do like a series of dots to get some of those curves. And like that point right there is a little gummy because it got caught in a grain and I couldn't continue the path I was going in, so it didn't come out quite right. But overall, it worked all right. Now, I would say I would almost wager you a wood burning tool would burn the pattern faster, but to my advantage, this gave me a little playtime on the process of doing something that I could do like a slow path and just slowly, methodically controlling the pattern. And I did try to get down here at the bottom a little bit of shading practice, much harder to do with a fine point tip, a soldering tip. Whereas I think with a broader, flatter surface, I could do a touchdown and get an even flat surface toasting the surface rather than burning it. And up here towards the top, it's a little garbled in that centerpiece. That's again due to, like, my instincts are still pen based. So, and that's, I think I probably got a burn on this finger too. I can kind of still feel it being super sensitive. Is the tendency is when holding that tool, like the soldering iron is like this long, probably like this. It's a very small soldering iron. This part's the handle, this part's the tip. And if you're holding it here, you've got a lot of space between your finger and the tip that's touching the wood. And my impulse is to take a piece like this and crawl up real close to it to get fine control of it. But you can't, because that end is hot. It'll burn you. And I think I probably got a couple zings on the back of this finger here too, because the impulse, again, is to hold it like here, and you're trying to sort of balance that tip for fine control, and you're always bumping your fingers right up close to the hot end, and it's a little tricky. But I do think, like, generally speaking, you don't go for detail that fine when wood burning. Now you can, but you're usually going to do broader sweeps and blends of color. So I feel like I could probably experiment a little bit more with learning the art. But like I said, like, that would be more along the lines of me curious about playing with it at some point. Not so much of like, I have an idea for some things I want to do with it. So I'm going to focus instead on the things I actually have the desire to work on right now. I'm not going to make new projects to work on when I've got such a list of things to already play with. But yeah, I mean, it's an okay tool for it. I feel like the other aspect of that soldering iron is I don't think it's a constant temperature. Because I had times where if I just touched the tip against and I did have to wipe it off on the sponge a few times to wipe off some of the char. But I did feel that sometimes I could put the tip right on the wood and it would instantly start smoking and give me a black spot. And other times I would put the tip on there and it was like, are you on? I need you to actually make a mark. And I could hold it there and I might get a light brown dot, but it wasn't darkening. And so I do think it has cycles of on and off. And I feel like there's probably a way to make a tool have a very fine control over the temperature you get off of it. Like maybe there are high-end wood burning tools out there that you could probably get I just want a browning temperature for a hardwood. And you set it to that temperature and you can use that control over that temperature range to get a nice even tone on sections. But the soldering iron honestly works pretty decent. Now, some of my issues may in part have been the fact that I have no idea what kind of wood this is. And I have no idea like what kind of processing it went through. I would almost wager you this is a ply. I feel like it's probably 2, maybe 3 layers of an ultra thin ply. It might be a single layer of like a birch, but whatever it is, it may behave differently than say some of the other woods I could use for wood burning on. And there may be a better wood to work with. I don't know. I mean, I can't say for sure, but you can do a lot with a soldering iron on wood scrap. Alrighty, almost 40 minutes, so I'm going to call it here for tonight. I may dabble a little bit more with some crafts before I go to bed tonight, but I think I'm kind of done for the day. I will catch you on Thursday. So thank you for joining me. Hope you're having some creative adventures on your own. Oh yeah, buried in snow. Make a snow fort. At least we're not in Texas. Apparently those people don't know how to handle it. I don't know how it got into Armageddon territory in Texas over, what, a couple inches of snow? But It is what it is. Take care, stay warm, make a snowman, have some tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwiches. Still smells like nail polish in here. Should have done it in a different room.